The tape.
I found the tape on a humid Thursday in late July of 2001. It's a kind of day when heat hangs low and even the pigeons seem to pant. I was 17, restless and jobless for the summer, with nights to kill and a habit of wandering the old video rental a block from my apartment. Imperial Video smelled of carpet glue and lemon oil. Its aisles were a slow archaeology of borrowed live stacks of plastic cases, posters curling in the corners, a counter where a woman named Marissa ruled with the kind of distracted patience people give to relics that refuse to die. That day I wandered to the back of the shop. Not because I needed a movie, but because it was possible to be alone in a place full of other people as unsaid evenings. Wedged between a faded romantic comedy and a training video for mechanics, a black cassette sat in a cracked sleeve. No glossy cover, no distributor, sticker only, a white label with 3 slanted words, so thin I had to squint. Shadows of the North. The ink looked like it had been written years ago, as if the person who labeled it had meant to hide it rather than name it. Shrugged when I asked about it. "We get weird donations," she said, folding a newspaper. "Take it if you want. Might be something good." I paid with change and carried the thing home like contraband. My apartment was small. A bad mattress, a bookshelf that held more plans than books, a fan that never made the air feel fresh. I still owned a battered VC Rancient thing that coughed at tapes like an old man coughing at the beginning of a story. I slid the cassette in that night at 9:13 p.m., lights low, the TV glowing like a reluctant truth-teller. The opening image was grainy, low contrast. A voiceover spoke in a slightly off-sync cadence, while a handheld camera wandered through a town of stone and rain. It looked like a regional documentary interviews with people whose faces had been mapped by wind. Wide shots of carved stones and empty streets, a narrator mumbling about voices that stay. If the tape had stopped there, I might have shrugged it off. Regional docs are full of melancholic vistas and folksy metaphors, but when the camera panned a street with a crumpled awning, my chest tightened. The awning's blue was the exact blue of the bakery 2 blocks from my building. There was peel of an old sticker on the lamppost, the way I remembered peeling one for a dare when I was 12. Small, stupid details stacked up like a deck of cards. A torn poster, graffiti tag I'd once blurred out with a coat of paint. My neighborhood was not merely similar to the one on screen. It matched in minutia. I rewound. I watched the frames again, frame by frame. I pointed at the cracked ceramic cat on the mantel, then at the cat-shaped figurine I kept in my apartment that leaned and blinked when the air conditioner clicked. My rational brain offered explanations like damp equals mold. Cities repeat themselves. Filmmakers travel, memory misfires, but the evidence accumulated until the rational voice felt thin and useless. The tape seemed patient and deliberate, as if waiting for me to notice. Night after night, I fed the tape to the VCR. The documentary that had begun as an abstract piece about northern ruins seeped into something else, sin overlaid that slid from strangers to places I recognized. The chipped step outside the corner bar, the narrow hallway that smelled of fried dough, a table. A street vendor sold the same plantain chips my uncle liked. At first it was distant on establishing shot here, a background detail there, but then it turned intimate. The camera found angles it shouldn't have. An overhead view that matched the balcony of my 3rd floor, neighbor a shot that looked into a living room with a fan identical to the one I had, a bookshelf with the spines. In the same order I kept them. A habit so idiosyncratic, I had once rearranged them to remind myself of a promise. The tape stopped being a curiosity and started being an anatomy of my days. One evening it showed someone's hands picking a warbling mug from the counter, fingers with a nick in the same place my right index finger had a scar. Another night it paused on a cat weaving between legs and purring in that odd half-throat way Lulu did when she wanted a box as a bed. The effect was cumulative. 1 frame would strike me as coincidence, 2 frames suspicious, 10 frames undeniable. I began to watch, not to be entertained, but to learn the rules of an animal I could not see. The first time I truly lost the illusion of separation came on July 25th. I'd been out with friends. Backstreet beers and pool. The kind of night that makes you think you can laugh the small things off forever. I returned home at 1:40 a.m., keys jangling, the city soft and humid. I took off my shoes and put them by the door. Then, half asleep, I fed the tape into the player. The screen showed a camera trailing someone down the long stairwell of the bar I'd been at over my shoulder slightly to the right. My jacket flashed in the frame, the pattern on my shirt, the way I tucked hair behind my ear. The camera captured me from a perspective no one had a right to hold. It captured the angle directly behind my shoulder. I felt, absurdly, watched in a way that no human observation had ever produced. Sleep went scarce. I started keeping a small spiral notebook. Timestamps, frames, short jabs of description, 2:03 a.m., shadow at doorway, 1:40 a.m., staircase, 9:21 p.m., lamppost with peeled sticker. The list grew with a kind of terrified devotion. The tape matched my days with an accuracy that punched holes in my trust. Once I noted down the tape showing me pick up the phone. Moments later, the landline rang. Another time it showed my neighbor in the corridor, breathless and apologetic, exactly when a knock sounded through my door. The chronology on the tape bent like an old film reel. Sometimes it showed the past, sometimes the present, sometimes something that had not yet happened. On July 29th, the tape took a decision that my bones still remember. The footage was a slow pan of my living room. Camera hovered, absorbing the furniture like a predator testing a prey's rhythm. There I was, in pajamas, eyes closed. On the mantel, a small digital clock glowed 2:03. The recorded me breathed as recorded people do, regular, oblivious. Then a shadow grew at the mouth of the doorway. It had the upright suggestion of a person, but no features. The edges stuttered like damaged frames, as if the darkness itself had been encoded incorrectly. The shadow did not move, but the camera hesitated on it, and then focused as if it wanted me to see. I woke up in my own bed, gasping, breath shallow. My clock read 2:03. The hallway outside was ordinary. The faint hum of a neighbor's refrigerator, a distant television. I turned on all lights methodically, as if light were an answer. There was a post-it note my mother had left earlier: milk. Bread. The banalities of life sat in absurd juxtaposition to the knowledge that some I had been, or no I should have been. From that night on, the tape no longer only mirrored my life. It started to anticipate it with a calm, awful accuracy. Scenes would play, and then seconds later, events would click into place in my apartment. A knock at the door. The kettle whistling when the tape showed steam. A car horn exactly as the tape had framed it. I began to watch with an extraction of dread and compulsion, like someone who reads a weather report that will cause a storm and stays outdoors anyway. I tried to fight it. I snapped the plastic shell of the cassette and pulled the ribbon out, the magnetic tape trailing like a dark tongue across my living room floor. I burned what I could on the fire escape. The ribbon curled and blistered, and the smell of melting plastic clawed the back of my throat. I thought destroying the thing would break the chain. 37 minutes later, for reasons my rational mind flailed around, I put the empty VCR back on, and the television lit up. The screen showed my living room floor, and the black ribbons lay there, charred and curling, each ash-dark strand exactly where my hands had left them. The tape had recorded its own destruction, and in that, declared itself beyond the physical. Memory began to fray. Was I seeing the tape, or was the tape seeing me? My life folded into frames until I could no longer tell which image came first. I washed dishes with the tape's last frame still burning behind my eyes. A bus number I recognized. A lamppost missing a sticker. My sofa's faint oil stain. Each detail was a nail. Tape had introduced a rhythm to my days. The rhythm made me obey. One dawn, in a stretch of thin blue light, watched until the frame showed an impossible angle. A camera placed straight above my bed, looking down like a spy on a ceiling. The lens centered on my face, and as the frame advanced, my mouth on the screen opened in a silent, dawning shape. The recording was already inside me. When the recorded mouth formed the word, my real mouth echoed it, as if the tape and flesh slept in the same language. By the end of this first act, I had stopped going out. I stopped inviting friends around. I left the curtains drawn and kept the TV as a small, flickering lighthouse. I took 2 whispering questions at the screen. Who are you? Why me? childish, absurd attempt to bargain with a thing that made no move to answer. Sometimes, in the hush between frames, I thought I heard the scrape of magnetic tape, as if some enormous spool turned in the dark, wanting to be rewound but never reaching the end. The tape had become a mirror and a summons, and I could not decide which of us was the watched and which was the watcher. I don't remember falling asleep that night. What I do remember is waking up at exactly 3:11 a.m., the glow of the paused VCR blinking in the darkness. The tape had stopped. The house was silent. Should have felt relief, but instead my chest felt like it was being crushed. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't pressed pause. The image on the TV froze on a street corner. My street corner? The same cracked sidewalk where the old sycamore tree leaned over, branches dipping low like crooked arms. The timestamp in the corner of the tape read 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 27 seconds. Less than 2 minutes ago. Someone, or something, had been outside my house, filming. My hands shook as I pressed play again. The tape stuttered to life, the camera panning slowly toward the front of my house. Every brick, every window, the mailbox dented from when the snowplow clipped it last winter. The camcorder zoomed in on my bedroom window, and then the screen went black. Static hissed. For a moment I thought maybe the tape had ended, but then faint shadows flickered across the gray snow of the static. Shapes that looked almost like faces pressing against a frosted glass. Whispering seemed to seep through the speakers. Not words exactly, but syllables stretched too thin, as though language itself were being bent out of shape. I scrambled for the eject button. The VCR whined, the machine chewing against the tape like it didn't want to give it up. When the cassette finally popped out, it was warm, most hot in my hands. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Told myself it had to be a prank. Maybe one of my neighbors found the tape and thought it'd be funny to mess with me. Maybe I was overtired and seeing connections where there weren't any. But the thing was, I lived alone. I kept to myself. Nobody knew enough about my routines to stage something like this. And then there was the matter of the second tape. When I walked outside to get the paper, there it was. Sitting neatly on my porch, the same black VHS cassette with the same white sticker, completely blank. No envelope, no explanation, just waiting. For hours, I stared at it. My better judgment screamed at me to throw it out, to smash it into pieces and toss it into the trash. But curiosity gnawed at me, louder and louder, until by late afternoon, I gave in. The second tape began like the first grainy, washed out, amateur documentary footage. Only this time, the subject wasn't my neighborhood. It was me. The camera followed me through snippets of my life, sitting at the diner down the street, walking home from work, buying groceries. Always filmed from a distance, always without my knowledge. Some shots were weeks, maybe months. Old I recognized clothes I hadn't worn in forever. But then the footage caught up to the present. There I was on screen, sitting on my couch watching the first tape. The time stamp in the corner of the footage matched the exact time from the night before. I froze. The camera angle shifted, zooming closer, steady as a predator. It was recording me in real time. Impossible, I whispered. But when I turned toward my window, the curtains swayed slightly, like someone had just been there. My skin prickled. I darted to the door, yanked it open, and stepped onto the porch. Nobody. The street stretched out empty. Quiet, except for the faint hum of distant traffic. I wanted to call the police. Even picked up the phone, dialed the first 3 numbers. But what would I tell them? That I was being haunted by a VHS tape? That someone knew everything about my life? It's down to the exact second I pressed play on a machine that had been relevant since the early 2000s. No one would believe me. So I sat back down, rewound the tape, and forced myself to keep watching. That was my mistake, because the more I watched, the more the footage seemed to anticipate me. At first it showed me watching the tape, frame for frame. But then, seconds before I even moved, the video predicted what I would do next. If I scratched my head, the footage showed me doing it just before I did. If I leaned back on the couch, the tape leaned back first. It wasn't just recording me anymore, it was directing me. By midnight, I couldn't take it. I hit eject, stuffed the tape back into its case, and shoved it deep into the closet beneath a pile of old coats. Out of sight, out of mind. Except, that night, as I lay in bed, the faint whir of a VCR spinning echoed through the house. I knew I hadn't left it on. My throat dried, my pulse thudding in my ears. I crept into the living room, each step heavier than the last. Sure enough, the machine glowed. The tape was back inside, spinning by itself. On the screen, static rolled, and then my bedroom. Live. The angle from the corner near my closet? I spun around, searching the darkness. Nothing. But when I turned back to the screen, the image zoomed in on the bed. And I swear to God, I saw myself lying there, fast asleep. The next day, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove aimlessly for hours. Every intersection, familiar, but somehow wrong. Every passerby, a potential shadow behind the lens. When I returned home, exhausted, I half expected to find a third tape waiting on the porch. There wasn't, but when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the TV was already on. The VCR purred, a fresh cassette inside. I hadn't left it there. This one was different. The label wasn't blank. It had a word written in shaky black ink. Tonight I almost ran. I almost packed my bags, left everything behind, drove until the car gave out. But some part of me, stubborn, terrified curiosity, forced me to stay. The footage this time was darker, harder to follow. The camera moved shakily through corridors I didn't recognize. The walls were peeling, stained, the lights flickering. At first I thought it was an abandoned hospital or some decrepit office building. Then the camera turned a corner, and my stomach dropped. It was my basement. The camera descended the narrow steps, lingering on the cracked concrete floor, the rusty shelves cluttered with boxes. But something was different. There was a chair in the center of the basement. A chair that wasn't mine. Strapped to that chair was me. The figure on screen struggled against the ropes, head jerking, muffled screams escaping behind duct tape. My eyes stared straight at the camera, wide with terror. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The footage wasn't just showing the future anymore. It was showing me a fate I couldn't escape. The tape ended abruptly with a close-up of my doppelganger's face, tears cutting paths down his cheeks, lips trembling beneath the tape. The time stamp read 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Tonight. The night. I tore through the house like a man possessed, checking every door, every lock, every shadow. My basement was empty, just as it had always been, but I couldn't shake the image from my head. How could the tape know? How could it show me things that hadn't happened yet? By the time the clock struck 11:30, I was pacing the living room, every creak of the floorboards making my skin crawl. I wanted to smash the tape, the VCR, the entire TV if I had to, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. The tape wasn't just showing me my life anymore, it was dictating it. And midnight was coming. Midnight was a countdown echoing in my head. Each second dragged like the tightening of a noose. The clock ticked from 11:45 to 11:46, and I could barely breathe. The TV was on again, though I never touched the remote. The VCR hummed like a heartbeat, steady and cruel. The screen remained black, but the sound wasn't static anymore. It was breathing. Ragged, uneven breaths, filling the room as though someone else were sitting beside me. I pressed mute on the remote, but the breathing didn't stop. It came from everywhere, the vents, the walls, even behind me. I spun around, but the living room was empty. Back to the TV. The black screen flickered. And then, without warning, it cut to the image of my front door. Same camera quality, same time stamp. 11 hours, 50 minutes, and 2 seconds. The footage showed the door from the outside, but I was inside. I stepped toward it, heart battering my ribs. On screen, the door handle jiggled, slowly, deliberately. Then 3 knocks, heavy, hollow, vibrating through the speakers. I froze, because at that exact moment, 3 real knocks echoed from my actual door. Boom, boom, boom. I nearly collapsed. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my chest. I crept toward the door, every bone in my body telling me not to open it. Through the peephole, nothing. Just the darkness of the porch. But on the screen, the camera showed a figure standing there. Blurred, faceless, but unmistakably human. Tall, rigid, breathing in that same ragged rhythm that filled my ears. The knocks came again, harder this time. "Who's there?" My voice cracked like dry wood. Silence, but on the tape. The figure leaned closer to the door, pressing its faceless head against the wood, whispering something I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward, away from both the door and the TV, cornering myself against the wall. The timestamp now read 11 hours, 55 minutes, and 37 seconds. Time was running out. I decided then I wouldn't wait for midnight. I yanked the VCR's plug from the wall, sparks snapping as the screen went dark. My chest heaved with relief, finally. But when I turned around, the TV was still on. The VCR sat unplugged, dead, yet the tape kept rolling. The footage now showed me in real time, standing in my living room, staring at the unplugged machine. The angle was from above, like a bird's eye view, though I had no cameras in my ceiling. My every breath, my every tremble mirrored perfectly on screen. "Stop it," I screamed, grabbing the remote, slamming every button. Nothing changed. The TV showed me as I dropped the remote, as I sank to my knees, as I clutched my head in despair. And then the screen split. On the left, me, alive, desperate, clawing at the floor. On the right, the basement, that same chair, empty, waiting. The timestamp flashed red. 11 hours, 58 minutes, and 0 seconds. 2 minutes, I ran for the door. I didn't care what was outside anymore. I just needed to escape. My hands fumbled with the lock, slick with sweat, until finally I yanked it open. Cold air blasted my face. But the world outside was wrong. The street was gone, the sky was gone. Everything beyond my porch was black. A void, swallowing the horizon. My house floated in emptiness, the only light the sickly glow from inside. I staggered back. The door slammed shut by itself. The TV now filled the room with blinding static. Shapes writhed within its hands, pressing against the glass, mouths opening in silent screams. The sound built to a roar, louder and louder, until it was all I could hear. And then, abruptly, silence. On screen, the basement again. Only now, the chair wasn't empty. I was in it. Strapped down, head lolling, eyes wide with terror. "No," I shouted, rushing forward, pounding on the screen like I could break through and free myself. But the image just stared back at me, my own reflection in agony. The timestamp ticked forward. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds. 30 seconds. The me on screen lifted his head, looked directly at the camera, directly at me. His lips moved beneath the duct tape. First it was muffled, but then the sound seeped into the room, words bending through layers of distortion. "Trade." My blood froze. The chair creaked. The me on screen began to smile slowly, horribly while my own chest compressed like invisible cords were wrapping around me. I tried to move, but my arms snapped to my sides, my legs locked. Pressure cinched tighter and tighter until I realized I wasn't watching the footage anymore. I was becoming it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The static surged again, filling every corner of my skull. The timestamp hit 12 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. The screen went black. When vision returned, I was staring at the basement floor. My wrists ached. Ropes dug into my skin. I jerked, but I was tied to the chair exactly as the tape had shown. It wasn't a prediction. It was a trap. I screamed until my throat tore. The room smelled of mildew, rust, and something fouler, something that reminded me of rotting meat. Shadows shifted just outside the frame of my sight, whispering, giggling, voices layered atop each other. Footsteps descended the stairs, heavy, deliberate. I looked up. Figure emerged from the darkness, carrying the camcorder. The lens glowed red. Its face was a blur, like static given form, features rearranging every second, sometimes familiar, sometimes alien. It raised the camera, pointed it at me, and began to record. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into words that finally made sense. "Now you are part of the tape. I don't know how long I've been here. Sometimes the camcorder is gone. Sometimes it's right in front of me, humming as though alive. The figure returns often, adjusting the ropes, checking the lens, always silent, just watching. I've screamed, begged, Promised anything for release. Nothing changes, except the TV. Yes, there's a TV here too. Old, flickering, perched in the corner of the basement. Shows me everything the house above. The streets I used to walk, the life I used to live, and sometimes it shows new tapes. New people. I've watched them discover the first cassette. I've watched them sit where I sat, curiosity pulling them in. I've watched them realize, too late, that the footage isn't just footage, it's a snare. The camera always finds its next subject. I try to warn them. I scream at the screen, but they never hear me. They only see the tape, the story, the horror unfolding in their own homes. And then one by one they join me. The basement is filling with chairs, and still the camera records. It always records. Forever.